When I was a kid, growing up in the Bobby Fischer era and the 1972 World Championship, I would literally run to the club and want to be at the chessboard where all of the members were around, and all of the members were moving the pieces and analyzing and saying, no, 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 he should go here. No, 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 he should go there. And it was a very wonderful social exchange, and I learned a great deal about chess and world championship matches by sharing the analysis with other members of the club. It was really one of the great highlights of my growing up in chess, and so I would like to share that with you by going through a world championship. In those days, back in the 70s, world championship matches were rather regular, but they only came once every 3 years. So regular but irregular. And you looked forward to a world championship match once every 3 years. It was a very lengthy cycle, as the world champion would wait for a challenger to be determined. Let's get to the game. Magnus opened up with e4. Again, Magnus could clinch the match with a victory in this game, or he could clinch the match with 2 draws. He opened up e4, and several times in the match, Vichy had already defended a Berlin defense. So, knight f6 with a counter attack on the pawn on e4. White could defend this pawn by defending it with his knight, defending it with d3, or defending it with his queen. It's been considered for the better part of 100 years that White should castle, that this is White's best plan. And Black says, wait a minute, you left a pawn on capture, I'm going to take the pawn, do your worst. Knight takes e4 was played, d4 was White's answer. So notice, by the way, from those of you who were in the first class, how these world champions are playing. First of all of White's moves have been geared towards control of the center, as have Black's. White is doing everything in a very timely fashion. He's not moving pieces once or twice or thrice. White's king is in safety. Black's king is not in safety at the moment, and White is trying to open the position to get at Black's king. Black retreated the knight. This is all considered very conventional moves, or what are called theory in chess. So knight d6, been played a lot. Just let me boldly point out the obvious. Black could capture this pawn on d4. That would give him a material advantage of 2 pawns. However, as we see, if we move our rook to e1, oops, the knight is pinned to the king, and after d5, knight takes d4, White has a very serious initiative. He's threatening to capture twice on c6. He's threatening to play f2, f3, winning the knight, and Black is in serious trouble. So Black plays knight d6, bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. White recovers the pawn that he sacrificed, knight f5, queen takes d8 check, king takes d8. So we'll stop here for just a moment and say, you know, some very interesting things have happened. The first is that Black has lost the right to castle. Now that he's moved his king, there's no more castling. So that's not good for Black. White has doubled the pawns on c7 and c6, so Black's pawn structure has been dinged. That's not good for that element, the pawn structure. So those are two bad things that have happened to black. He's had to move his king, giving up the right to castle. He's had double pawns on the queen side. So what does he get in return? He gets the two bishops. From the material point of view, from the material count, black is not ahead in the material count. But grandmasters consider that the bishops, even though the bishops and knight are both worth 3 points each, are a smidgen. They're a little bit better than the knights. So black has the long-term prospect of having the two bishops. Okay. So then what happened? Bishop d7. This is a very topical position amongst the world's best players today, this precise position, and almost all the top players enjoy playing both sides of this Berlin defense. One of the interesting things about chess openings amongst the really, really top players is how precise you have to play. If you play a position, if you play a defense like the Najdorf Sicilian, if you play a Grunfeld defense, these are very, very sharp defenses where every single move is vital, that you can't mix up your move order. You could lose the game just by getting your move order wrong. Conversely, the Berlin is like one of those defenses where a lot of the moves are interchangeable. Black here has just played he's made a lot of moves. Bishop to d7, bishop to e6, h6, knight e7, and it seems like he just has a large selection, a great number of options that he can make. In the game, Vichy played bishop d7. Vichy, in 2 games earlier in the match, in both games, he moved his king. In this, the penultimate game, he played bishop d7. And this showed a little combativeness, that he wasn't going to, he's going to look for a change over what had previously taken place. Knight c3, h7, h6. Sorry, I just wanted to point out that once again, black has played in this position king c8, he's played b6, he's played c5, and he's played a5. A lot of these moves are interchangeable. Essentially, black wants his king out of the center, and he's going to put his king on c8, b6, and king to b7. So in what order should he play his pawn and his king? It seems to be largely a matter of taste. So h7, h6, b2, b3. Now, from white's perspective, if we think about white's future plans for a moment, and both players are constantly doing this, they're constantly looking for opportunities to get their pieces in as active squares as possible. So this bishop on c1, at the moment, this diagonal isn't that great. The g5 square is protected by the pawn. The e3 square is protected by the knight, which leaves d2 and f4 as squares. Bishop on f4 makes perfect sense, but at a deeper level, what white has is white has a structural majority. He has pawns on e5, f2, g2, and h3. So we say he has a structure of 4 pawns against a structure of 3 pawns on the king side. So we say that white has a 4-3 pawn majority. In an ideal world, white would love to make the move g2, g4, attacking the knight. The knight would go away, we give the knight the boot, and then white would play f2, f4. That would be illegal, of course, because the knight's in the way. But we can imagine that white would really like to have his pawns here and here. Then he could use his majority. Okay. If, in this exact moment, we put our bishop on f4, in a deeper sense, somewhere down the line, we've misplaced our bishop. We want to be able to advance our kingside majority, and therefore Magnus played this move, b2, b3. What he was seeking to do was to put his bishop on a more effective diagonal. King c8, white has his problems, black has his problems. Black is trying to solve his problems by putting his bishop in the pocket. So we can imagine black playing the move b6, and then the black king coming to b7. It's in the pocket of the pawns. Sometimes you have this imagery of a billiard table. In the hole in the billiard table, the ball drops down into a net, and it's called the pocket. And in a chess terminology, the king on b7 would kind of be in the pocket of the pawns. Nicely insulated, protected. Bishop b2. So with the bishop on b2, what white is looking for, he hopes, is that at a certain moment, he'll push his pawn suddenly and unexpectedly, and this bishop on b2 will roar down the long diagonal. Well, at least that's the plan. You got to have a plan, right? c6, c5. This move, c6, c5, at the time it was played, and I was watching the game in real time, of course, was a bit of a surprise. In the old days, it wasn't considered a good idea to play the move c5, which weakens black's control of the d5 square when the knight could hop there right away. So what players did is they would play the move b7, b6, preparing to put the king away, rook a1 to d1. Now play the move knight e7. We'll understand why in just a moment. The knight drops back, the rook comes over. White has a beautiful rooks developed on the central files, the D file and the E file, and only now does black play the move c6, c5, because he's preventing the knight, with the white knight on c3, from hopping into the center, because there would just simply be a trade. On his next move, black might play bishop e6, followed by king d7. By the way, this exact thing happened in the game between Viswanathan Anand, who's playing black against Magnus, and Hikaru Nakamura, America's #1 and highest rated American in the world, was playing black. So Vishy obviously has a great deal of experience, but he had played the unexpected move for me, which was c5, when precedent really was for b6. Okay, rook d1, b6, rook e1. White has done very, very well. He's brought all of his pieces into the center. He's got a harmonious position. He's doubled up his opponent's pawns on the c file. And furthermore, although black has the two bishops, and it's an advantage to have the two bishops, this bishop on f8 really isn't scaring anybody. This bishop on f8 is blocked by its own pawns and is at this moment not very effective. Bishop e6. This was a very, Vishy took a very concrete approach in his preparations for this game. This move, bishop e6, and his idea, his follow-up idea, his concept, what we're about to see, impressed me a great deal. I really like this move, bishop e6. Why am I so enthusiastic about the move bishop e6? Well, in the first place, it's a great blockader. The bishop on e6 blocks this pawn from advancing. Okay, Fair enough, no problem. Why should I be so thrilled about that? Take away the pawn on e5. Just, take it away. And what do we discover? That with the pawn gone from e5, this rook on e1 has much more greater effect. This bishop on b2 has much greater range. This knight on f3 could potentially hop to e5. So by blockading that pawn on e5, literally black is making 3 white pieces less effective. The knight on f3, the rook on e1, and the bishop on b2 are all less effective because this pawn is blocking them. By blockading the pawn, you're just making sure, absolutely sure, that white doesn't get any ideas of playing e5, e6, and just sacrificing the pawn. Fair enough. White says, you got your shtick going, I've got mine. I'll bring my knight into the center of the board. And this is the concept that I really like from Vishy. Vishy played the move g7, g5. From another point of view, white might play the move knight f4 and take the bishop. If white captures the bishop, then black loses the advantage that he has in the position of the two bishops, and all that remains are his double pawns. So in a sense, as gorgeous as that knight is in the center of the board, there's also this idea of knight f4, and now the move g7, g5 was played, preventing knight f4. Sometimes in chess, the cure can be worse than the disease. To prevent the move knight f4, you cured that move, you prevented the move knight f4 by playing the move g5. But the move g5 has made the square f6 a tremendously weak, severely weak square, and a great outpost for white. So here, the cure might be worse than the disease. c2, c4. But along with controlling the f4 square, another great benefit for Vishy is that this minority of 3 pawns versus this majority of 4 pawns, the minority is doing a very good job at keeping white's pawns at bay. White is not able to play f4 and g4 and f5 and drive black's pieces backwards. So this pawn, g5, is stopping white from using his majority. Similarly, white does the same. c2, c4. White blocks, black has a majority of 4 versus 3 on the queen side, and white locks up the black majority by playing c4. King b7. And now, white has an issue to solve. First of all, white has to decide what's his plan? What is he going to do further? From a harmonic point of view, white has kind of achieved a bit of a maximum for his pieces. The rooks are excellent, the knights are excellent, the bishops are excellent. But okay, what are we going to do for a plan? What would you guys do? Any suggestions for white? Don't all shout out at once now. Yes?
It's a way for trying to split black's pawn to defend his king.
You suggest the move a2, a4.
Yes.
Very good suggestion, by the way. In fact, that happened very concretely. Let's say a4, a5, which in fact happened in the game. Now we need a further plan. It's like we play a4, he played a5. So what's our further plan? In fact, I'm asking you in truth, or fairness, or unfair, a very difficult question. And in principle, when I get stuck, I get a position like this as white, and I say, okay, I'm doing really good, but how do I improve? What move do I make? How do I start looking around the board and asking my pieces, how are they feeling? So I would do this. I would consciously do this. I'd ask this guy, how you doing? I'm great. Leave me alone. Bishop, never felt better. Bishop says, I'm feeling as good as I can. The rooks, fine. So then I come to the king or the knight. How are you doing? The knight on f3 answers truthfully, I'm not sure. I think I'm okay, but I don't have a great deal of room to go to. In fact, there might be better squares for me. Could you look for a better square? And then I go, aha, I can improve the position of my knight. I could move this knight to this square, d2, followed by e4, followed by f6. My knight would be much nicer placed in my opponent's camp. Besides this route, knight d2 to e4 to f6, I could also play knight to h2, knight to g4, knight to f6. Get to the same place just by a different route. So if I were white, I would be very attracted to this idea of moving my knight to f6. But I'd also ask my king, how about you? Can you be improved? And my king says, yeah, I could be improved. You could play g2, g3, king g2, and I'm a little bit more up the board. And then I talk to my pawns. These pawns, man, no, it's like these guys. I've got to figure out a way of playing g4 and f4 and advancing my pawns. So what Magnus, practice, has taught these players most especially is that white does want to play the move g2, g4, but he doesn't want to do it prematurely. If he plays g4 and drives the knight away, sometimes there can be the counterattack h5. So what white wants to do is he wants to play g4 and support the pawn with his king. The world champion played king h2, and we'll understand why in a moment. a7, a5 by black, a2, a4. So now the queen side, if you will, is locked down, right? Everything, all the action now moves from the queen side to the center as well as the king side. The move g2, g4 is basically unpreventable. So in anticipation of being attacked, the knight voluntarily moves backwards. g4, knight g6. So the knight moves to a little bit more flexible squares. The knight on g6 controls or attacks, if you prefer, the h4 as well as the f4 square. King g3. So again, we see this very nice harmony by the world champion as he's trying to bring all of his pieces into the ideal squares where the pieces will be most effective. Now with the king on g3, ideas of counterattack with h5 really aren't going to succeed. The pawn on g4 is well protected. And in fact, quite the opposite. Now that white's king is on g3, white has ideas of potentially advancing his h-pawn. Okay, bishop e7. At very long last, black connects his rooks. Bishop e7. And now white says, okay, I got everything going that I could possibly get going. This last move, bishop e7, kind of stops the h4 idea. The one This guy's good, 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 good. Improvement. Let's improve this guy. Knight d2. Black says, well, both my rooks need improvement, but I can only improve one of them at a time. Let me improve this one. Yes?
After bishop e7,
Yes?
why couldn't he exchange to take the way the bishop paired and also the knight would have recaptured back to where he came from?
Right. Very good question. Very good question. So the question was, after this move, bishop e7, why shouldn't we just, for example, why not take it? Knight takes e7. Knight would have to recapture. And now we get a position that white has gotten rid of the opponent's two bishops advantage. But remember, that knight on d5 was pretty attractive too. Right now, what we have is a bishops of opposite color position. Bishops of opposite color middle games are notoriously even. A lot of these games are drawn. White still has a problem. How is he going to make progress? At a certain moment, he's going to have to play either h4 or f4. It'll take him a while. I believe white's still a little bit better. Yes?
Well, yeah, because I was thinking from here you can go knight d2 to e4.
Yes.
And then, because the knight on e4 is doing pretty much the same thing the knight on e5 was doing, threatening to go to f6.
Absolutely. So the knight is very nice on e4. Let me play a move, for example, let's say rook David 8. And again, at this point, white could very happily park his knight on f6. But in terms of using his majority, that is to say, in terms of playing f4 or h4, he's still a long ways away from it. We'll go back just for a moment to this position. So I was thinking that knight takes e7, knight takes e7, h4, very kind of compelling move to cause an accident or a weakness on the g5, h6. The problem is h4 is premature because after takes rook g8, darn it, the bishop on e6, the rook on g8, what black's counterplay or counterattack against the g4 pawn is coming too quickly. So white can do something that's kind of cool here. Let's go back to this position for a moment. In the game, Magnus has played knight d2. For all of the things that we just looked at, how about this as a start? Oops, excuse me. How about this one as a starter move? I like this move, by the way. Bishop c1. So here's the idea behind the move bishop c1. After black brings his rook to the center, take the bishop, recaptures, take the rook, and now h4. Okay, so now you're set up very sweetly with the bishop on c1, and you want to do damage, good damage, to the g5, h6 pawn. Black captures. Check. You don't want to capture with the knight because of rook g8, as we've seen. So you capture with the king. Rook d3. Now you notice the pawn on h6 is really weak. If white could just trade rooks, then even though it's a bishops of opposite color, white is for choice. So I tried to play the move rook e3, offering the trade of rooks. The problem was that after rook d1, black isn't interested in trading, bishop d2. Now I'm afraid of rook e1, which would force the trade of rooks. So I'll play rook b1. And the problem is that because black has a very active rook, it makes up for his weakness on h6. If we continue the line for just a few more moves, notice we can't take the pawn quite yet. We have to go king g3. rook d1, and I've got the weakness on h6, but as compensation, black has a very active rook. So I was trying to make all of these ideas work, and then I came up with even a better solution for white. So we've been looking at capturing the bishop on e7 and then playing h4. Well, how about this move, knight f6? This looks pretty decent. If black plays in a typical fashion, rook d8, h4, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, pawn takes, knight takes. So all of these moves are typical for this position, what these grandmasters would do. The problem is that in this position, I think that white has a really good advantage. Like, I would love to play white's position here because white's kingside majority is much more meaningful than black's queenside majority. White's king is more active, and that pawn on h6 is a definite weakness. So I asked myself, why didn't Magnus play knight f6 with the idea of the follow-up h4? This is a really cool answer. Why didn't Magnus play this move? Anybody? Sir?
Black doesn't have to take the knight.
No, he doesn't.
It just activates that sacred rook on the H file and exchange rooks and say white.
Yes, well, exactly. It's just that variation that we showed a moment ago. After the move knight f6, black is welcome to bring the rook to the d file, and after h4, white's going to get a modest advantage, but a definitive one as well. There's no question that white is for choice, so why not play the move knight f6? The typical move rook d8 is going to lead to a position of advantage for white. Amazingly enough, after this move, black has a stunning answer. Black has the move. I mean, talk about a bolt from the blue. Whoa, how many of you anticipated that one? Me neither. I didn't see that move coming. No way. B5. Wow. Well, let's try to understand the move b5 and why it's so profoundly good. If white captures this way, then we play bishop takes b3, and thank you very much. The rook on d1 is under attack, as is the pawn on a4. We can stop and we can say black has the initiative, the ability to make threats. This position is favorable for black. Let's go back, and this time let's capture with the other pawn. A takes b5, and this is the nice point, that the move a4 undermines white's queenside structure. So that after we have the move captures, rook captures, this pawn on c4 is under attack by both the bishop as well as the rook. White will lose this pawn, black will recapture the pawn and stand better thanks to this unbelievable shot b5. So essentially we get a position like this, and black stands very well. In fact, after, for example, takes, this king could actually play an active role in going after the pawn on b5. So that was why Magnus actually ended up playing the move knight d2. Sorry, did you have a question?
Yes. So
Yes.
Still, why doesn't black play the move now?
after knight d2? Yes, b5. Well, in this particular case, now that the knight is on d2, the pawn on b3 is protected, so that after knight takes e7, knight takes e7, c4 takes b5, and there's no you can't capture that pawn because our knight, and our next move is going to be knight to c4. So white in this particular case would get to capture a pawn for free. Knight d2, rook d8, knight e4, bishop f8. So black retains the two bishops, but white, after his next move, everything is looking from a visual point of view nice for white. His knights, remember way long time ago, black played the move g7, g5 to stop the knight from coming to f4. White infiltrated the f6 square. So white took maximum advantage of the move g5. The queen side is locked. So in white's mind, he's got the edge. He's got the ideas of playing h4 and f4, and if he could ever illegally or magically play the move f4, f2 to f5 in one go, he'd be winning, just simply winning, strategically winning. So when the players reached this position, I actually thought that Vichy was in trouble. Okay? And to say that I was shocked by the next move, I cannot imagine what Magnus must have felt when Vichy played the move b5. Whoa! What a move is that? b5. I mean, that was just a bombshell. As a move that you thought you had been prevented. You know what that's like, right? You think you make a move, your opponent has a threat. He's going to move his queen to g3. So you move your rook to g1 to stop the guy from moving his queen to g3. The jerk moves his queen to g3 anyway, and then you suddenly realize to your horror that the queen is invulnerable. You're just like, oh, you're really shocked. So this move by black, b5, was not on white's radar. White had thought that he had totally prevented that move from ever occurring, and now it occurs. With this break b5, black is threatening to undermine white's whole queenside structure and create wonderful counterplay for his pieces. White has two ways of capturing. Let's see. In case of a4 takes b5, the same step that we saw before. a4 takes, rook takes, white structure, specifically the pawn on c4, is cracking. Rook c1, knight f4, bang. Ideas of knight d3 are now in the air. And already, knight takes f4, pawn takes f4, king takes f4, rook d2. With the World Championship title on the line, and you're leading by a point, and you wanted to maybe make a safe draw with white, this is not a safe draw. I mean, this is chaos. Anything can go wrong here. And this is definitely not what Magnus had in mind. The other capture, pardon me, let me just go back for a second. There was another capture. C takes b5. This looks pretty okay. C takes b5. What's wrong with this one? What is black going to do now? what would you say? Knight e7 is a very, very reasonable move. The idea behind knight e7, of course, is that you want to open up the diagonal for the bishop on b3. So you can take the pawn on b3. I beg your pardon. The problem is maybe after knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook e3 defends the b3 pawn, and I think black has okay compensation, but it's not certain. Knight e7 is a good move, but black has an even better one. Pardon? C6. Nice, yeah. I really like that move c6 a great deal. Bam! c6, attacking the knight. After takes, takes, suddenly the knight on d5, you can't maintain the knight on d5. Once the knight on d5 goes, the pawn on b3 goes. So this is just simply very good position for black. Black is doing great here. So in this position where literally he's shocked, like, you know, like the expression, you know, bolt of lightning out of clear blue sky, well, that's what the guy just experienced. And believe me, keeping your calm, keeping your composure when hit, you know, like with an unexpected move, is really hard, and I give Magnus a lot of credit. He played the best move in the position, bishop c3, and refrained from capturing any pawns. As we know, Magnus won this game, and he won the match. And afterwards, Vishy said Magnus was the deserved winner because he kept his nerves. And this was the moment that he was referring to. When you really are wobbly, you know, Mike Tyson says everybody has a plan. Everybody goes into a fight with a plan. And then you get hit. Okay. And he just got hit, but he stayed on his feet. And this was very, very nice play. But I still, having said all of that, I still like Vishy's game very much. So, bishop c3, takes, takes. And let me just go over here, sorry, so you can see. Now, king c6, a very, very good move. In a very strange way, as we look at black's king, at first, you know, you're kind of looking and you're getting the impression that that's not a safe king. But the more you look at the king on c6, I beg your pardon, the more you realize that black's king is actually perfect. There's not even a piece that can really check the king. The rook's not going to be able to check the king either on the b6 or d6 squares. The knight is not going to be able to check the king. So the king is actually perfect. The knight has blocked the d file, but now by moving the king to the c6, the b file is open. So black's pieces rooks are ready to come to the b file. And at this moment, I had the feeling that black was more than okay. That somewhere, somehow, I don't know exactly how, that white advantage has disappeared completely. Furthermore, if we imagine that at a certain moment white is going to challenge, that black is going to bring a rook to the b file and white wants to challenge that rook, we can imagine that this knight on d5, no longer supported by the rook, could become vulnerable, and we get ideas like knight f4, knight takes, pawn takes, king takes, bishop takes coming into being for black. So the king on c6 is not only wonderfully secure, it's actually assisting black in attacking the knight on d5. King f3. So what white starts thinking is, if black's king comes to attack this knight on d5, well, I can put my king on e4 with the idea of supporting the knight on d5. So king f3, and here I think Vishy made his first slip of the game. I think he's played really, really well, and I just didn't think he needed to play the move rook d8. Okay. I was thinking that all Vishy needed to do, when you look at the position from Vishy's point of view, two pieces really are not playing. The bishop on f8 and the rook on a8. I thought Vishy should play bishop e7. Okay? And with a very concrete idea that I'd like to show, let's say king e4. So, sorry, escape, pardon me. King e4 with the idea of keeping this knight protected. Yeah? Bishop takes f6. E takes f6. If we take on f6 with the knight, then we leave the pawn on c4 unprotected. Sorry. So bishop takes f6. E takes f6. Bishop takes d5 check. Bishop takes d5 check. C takes d5, king d6. And this position I thought was slightly better, or better, simply better for black. The d5 pawn is basically falling. That doesn't mean that it's the game over, of course, but if we imagine that black is simply going to be playing rook e8, check, in the near future. Where's my, how come I didn't draw a line? There we go. Check in the near future, followed by knight coming to this nice square f4. I thought black had an initiative. So the first moment after this move b5, king f3, I thought that Vishy should have played the move bishop e7. Yeah? Okay. So king e4. Now we get to the critical or key moment in the game, right here. Vishy probably at this exact moment, he started thinking that if I make a draw in this game, I have to win tomorrow as white. There's no guarantee I'm going to get an advantage with white, but exactly at this moment he was probably thinking optimistically that he stood better and that he has good chances of winning this position. So he started thinking about risking or gambling. Almost certainly before he went into the game, he's probably thinking, okay, all I got to do is draw today, and then I got all, put my life on the line tomorrow with the white pieces and hope for the best. But now he's optimistic, and he starts thinking about playing for the win. Had he been in a different set of circumstance, I'm absolutely certain that Vishy would have just simply played rook b3 in a kind of heartbeat, advancing the rook into white's camp, and after, for example, rook b1, rook b8, rook takes, we get a position like this where black simply has a very good position thanks to his active rook. We saw an earlier variation with the active rook. Instead, Vishy gets very optimistic and he plays rook b4. Wow, this is cool. How many of you would have played that move? In my case, I'm going to say it's a maybe. I would have definitely considered the move rook b4. I would have probably have not played it. But what have I said before? I've made like, 20 exchange sacrifices or more in my life. 18 were unintentional. But this one is cool. This one is cool. So what's going on here? Well, we can imagine that once that rook gets captured, we could capture the rook with the knight. But after knight takes, pawn takes, this pawn is hanging, this pawn on a4 is hanging, you're going to get at least a pawn, and black's going to have a nice pawns coming up the board. In the game, Magnus captured with the bishop. Now here comes the mistake. I don't think that the exchange sacrifice was bad. I don't think it was necessary. But here Vichy just kind of went gung-ho, hog wild. He took with this pawn. At first sight, that looks okay. I can understand wanting to take with that pawn. Black gets a protected pass pawn. On a really beautiful sunny day, you might put your rook here, you might put your king here, and you might push the pawn, and then everything's nice. On another different beautiful sunny day, by capturing with the c5 pawn, you've opened up the path for the bishop, and the bishop has a great diagonal. Had Vichy just given the position a bit more thought, I'm absolutely certain he would have played a takes a takes b4. And this is a much, much superior move. By capturing with the a pawn, essentially, black activates his rook. Okay? A takes b4. Now, what was I thinking? Rook a1? No. A takes b4. Oh, hold on. A takes b4 in this position. I was thinking knight. What did I do wrong? Sorry, I did something wrong. A takes b4. Knight h5. So what's the idea of knight h5? The idea of knight h5 is to play f2, f4. And in case of rook takes a4, rook a1, we get a position rook takes a1, rook takes a1, bishop takes check, pawn takes, king here. And I think this position is simply crazy. I mean, it's very, very hard for me as a chess grandmaster to tell you what's going on. What I see in the position is two connected pass pawns. And I would be very worried that that black will bring out his bishop and just start pushing these pawns. White has a great rook, a great exchange, but it's unclear. Yes. The next point was, what about, pardon me, sorry, a takes. In this position, I have played knight h5. Why did I play knight h5? Why didn't I play rook a1? Simply defending the pawn. Okay, well, let's see. Bishop to g7. So what has happened after this move, bishop g7, is basically white's pieces are stuck. There's all kinds of pins going on. This knight can no longer move because this pawn is attacked. Bishop takes pawn, knight. you won't be able to take with this knight because this pawn is attacked. When the knight comes to f4, knight takes, pawn takes, king takes, bishop takes pawn. So even though white's in a whole exchange ahead, I actually thought that this position was objectively fine for black. Pretty amazing position. Let's go back and see what happened in the game. In the game, rook b4 takes, knight h5. That's where I got the knight h5 idea from, too, by the way, following the course of the game. Magnus's idea is as clear as day. He simply wants to play, oops, f2, f4. Okay. King b7, f4, g takes f4, knight takes f4. And now we have, I think, a very key moment here. Here, unfortunately, the game is marred a little bit by time trouble. The players were down to their last resources on the clocks, and Vishy has played knight takes f4, and that definitely helped white. He should have played c6, knight takes g6, takes g6, knight, bishop, knight, bishop. And now in this position, although white has a material advantage of the exchange, we can see that these two bishops are going to be able to support this pawn, and this bishop will have a very nice anchor square on the d5 square. And that position, I prefer white. I like white's position, but it definitely is by no means over. Unfortunately for Vishy, he slipped once again, and at this moment he captured. And I think he just flat out underestimated this recapture with the knight. I'm pretty sure his first thought was white would have to recapture with the king. Then doubtlessly what Vishy had calculated was that he would, in this case, be able to get two very active bishops, and this pawn, oops, pardon me, this b pawn is actually a force to be reckoned with. So I'm sure this move, recapture knight takes f4, was an unpleasant one. Bishop takes c4, and now the big difference. Rook David 7. This rook is entering black's camp, and white is ready to play rook c1 and go after this pawn on c7. Rook a6. So in order to defend the bishop from the side, knight d5 with a double threat. First, oops, excuse me, I beg your pardon. First with the idea of capturing this pawn, and secondly, the idea of capturing this pawn. The bishop on c4 is blocked. Rook c6, rook takes, bishop finally comes out. But now there's a very nice combination in the position to wrap the World Championship match up. Again, from a visual perspective, it looks like black's chances aren't so bad. I mean, somehow everything came to the queen side, a 3 versus 1 majority, and on a very good day, this pawn could advance up the board, b4, b3, and so forth and so on, supported by two bishops and a rook. But, do you guys see the combination? Correct. Yes, precisely. Very, very nice. Rook takes c7 check, forcing the trade of rooks. And now the point is, these two bishops are lined up beautifully on the c file, so that if king takes c7, rook c1, king c6. Again, if king takes c7, rook c1, and one of the bishops will fall, and then the pawn on b4 will be easily contained. Once we take one of the bishops, the king can drop back and keep that pawn under lock and key. So the best chance for black was king c6, which was played. Knight comes back, knight b5, takes, takes, takes. And again, you know, on a really good day, it doesn't look like it's going to be so bad for black. I mean, there's two connected yes, I understand white has a passed pawn as well, but those are two connected passed pawns, and maybe when we can push them and supported by the king and bishop, they could be very dangerous. Magnus showed impeccable technique. He has it all under control. He advanced his pawn. Vishy advanced his. Magnus dropped back with the king. At the moment, Magnus is threatening to advance the pawn, so the pawn was blocked. And now white said, okay, I'll play over here on the king side with this move h4, and I'll create another pass pawn. Vishy said, okay, let me get my pawn going. Magnus said, me too. Takes, takes. So now Vishy could capture the pawn on g5. Just a second. But then after e7, actually that doesn't even, I have a stronger move. Simply rook check. I apologize. Yeah. Would be a winning check. So he didn't have that option. I was about to say bishop takes e7, bishop takes, rook takes is an easy win of king and rook versus king, and it is. But rook e5 is much simpler. a3, go babies go. King c3, and now Vishy resigned and conceded the world championship. There was one last trick that he was playing for, by the way. If white had played g6, Vishy had a2, and if g7, b2, and black's pawns are very, very dangerous. So this move, king c3, was very precise. If now b2, king b3, and black's pawns are blocked and will fall. So this was the World Championship game that decided the outcome of the World Chess Championship in Sochi, Russia. It was kind of an interesting occasion because Sochi, Russia was the site, of course, of the Olympics, and the World Championship match was attended by Vladimir Putin, who was the nominal chief of the organizing committee. Vladimir, like many, many Russians, really admires chess and chess players. So his government had supported the game, and at the closing ceremony, you know, they're awarding out the championship, the laurel wreath, and everything like that, and the players make speeches. So it's very, very common in Russia, not just Russia, but when you go on stage to accept your prize, you thank the people on stage, right? If it happens that you're in St. Louis and the mayor is on stage and you've never met the mayor of St. Louis or whatnot, you still say, Mayor, thank you so much for, you know, coming and supporting the event. And then whoever else is on stage, and thank you, madam, and thank you, sir, and stuff like this. So Magnus, at these moments in Europe, Russia's a bad guy. The West is portraying Russia and the Ukraine like, and Magnus, he goes up and he accepts his award, and he doesn't mention President Putin at all. He just ignored it. And it was like, there's this video of the closing ceremony where Magnus is saying, and I'd like to thank the organizers for their great job. And I'd like to thank all of my seconds and my supporters. And of course, all of those chess fans. You know, we do it for you. If you guys didn't enjoy chess, well, there would be no World Championship. So thank you, everybody. Goodbye. And Putin was like, like, what am I, a potted plant? It was a very, very funny closing, I thought.